Understanding the end user for any business is essential. Listen to Stephanie Shapiro talk about how the military family charity, Together We Stand, learned this lesson.
A couple of different things. First of all, I'm not sure that they took the time to get to know their stakeholders in the way they should have. So they determined that they knew they wanted to say thank you to the families. And in order to say thank you to the families, they determined they were going to do that by the way of delivering care packages to those families who were experiencing a deployment in their family during the Christmas holidays. Now, how are they going to do that? Because to your point, how do they tap into that community, and where do they even find these families? And so I come back to, this is a very Stephanie's father story, but my father, looked at the institution, wasn't particularly threatened by it, and so he called the chief of the defense staff.
Why not? I'm not sure that's a terrible idea, to be honest.
I mean, he didn't know who to call, so he figured I'll call the guy at the top and see what happens. And said to him, I want to give your families presents. It was General Vance at the time, and General Vance said, well, I don't see a problem with that. That sounds great. And so they put together a mechanism where my family was working through Support Our Troops at the time to help find the families that were going to be getting these gifts, and then helping to deliver the gifts to the families. Again, my parents didn't know what they didn't know, so they kind of looked to the subject matter experts at the time to say, all right, if you say do it this way, we'll do it this way.
You recounted a story to me about starting to understand the end user, about what you put into packages, and what's appropriate for different communities, and not just a military community specifically, but where that military community is based out of.
So I think this is how I started to get involved in how we sort of formed new leadership in the organization. My parents were incredibly well-intended individuals. They just wanted to do right by these families. But they didn't take the time to get to know who the families were, what they might need, where they were located. And frankly, my father was so busy working on so many projects at the same time. He didn't devote. He's amazing when he devotes 100% of his attention to something. But when you devote 5% of your attention to something, you're only going to get about 5% back from that. So he started getting me involved, and there was another individual that ended up being our current CEO. We took a trip to Edmonton, to CFB Edmonton, because my parents really wanted to give out some of these gifts in person and say thank you in person. And so I went because I helped organize the trip, and I brought my current CEO, Rick Seymour, who was in the role of more of a marketing capacity for us, and sort of helping us establish our brand. And I said to him, this must be a good opportunity for us to establish our brand by going to a military base and maybe taking some photos and seeing some of the good work that we're doing. And in these packages, it was really generous gifts to the blind eye. $25 to here, and 50% off to here, and $75 to here. And the total package was probably valued at somewhere around $400 of cash gift cards in there. We went to the base, and the whole situation, my parents stood up and gave this big speech about our family and talked a lot about Together We Stand and gave some hugs, and called it a day. And it was actually Rick Seymour, who's our current CEO, who sat us down at the end of the event, because my parents were like, that went really well. And he had his job might have been on the line, but he had the gall to say, actually, I think that was really terrible. We should never do that again. And I heard that and thought, well, this is going to be an awkward flight home, because now I got to fire the guy. And Rick and I ended up having a few glasses of wine that night and sitting in the lobby till well into early morning, because he kept trying to explain to me that we didn't know our stakeholders. We thought we were having impact, but we weren't having the impact that we were having. Do we know what an Army life is like? Does that differ from a Navy family? Does that differ from an Air Force family? If you live in Cold Lake, is your experience going to be different than somebody who lives in Halifax? And more importantly, did the families even need any of these gifts, or were they accessible to them? And his famous line is, we were being really great, but it was kind of like we were giving turkeys to vegetarians, like very well intended, but zero impact. We talk about this story all the time, but there's a frozen yogurt company in Toronto called Yogenfrues, and it's great. It's great. And every single package had $25 to Yogenfrues, except that Yogenfrues doesn't exist outside of the GTA. So the families, here we were trying to say thank you to the families, but to a certain degree, we were almost alienating them even more because we were making it so clear that we knew nothing about them. So when Rick and I took over the organization, and he tried to make me take over the organization, and I know my skills. I know what I am and what I'm not, and I'm not necessarily the CEO of an organization. I fired my father affectionately, walked into his office, said, "I love you so much, but you're fired." Hired Rick, and he convinced me that we needed to take the organization down to the studs. And our number one rule was no assumptions. We need to be vulnerable enough to strip down our egos and walk into all of these rooms and say, we know nothing about you. So why don't you teach us about you? And why don't you tell us what you need? And then we can go make that happen.